Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Kickstarter space here. My name is Liz Cook. I lead documentary film at Kickstarter. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to all of these amazing panelists. Ingrid, thank you for moderating. And with that, I will hand it off.
Great. So yes, thank you, and thank you to our beautifully arranged panel. Isn't this I've moderated a lot of panels in my life. I've never moderated a panel that looks like this. I feel like someone should make an oil painting of this. With a bowl of fruit in the middle. Anyway, it is a very large and slightly oddly arranged panel, but it's such a great lineup because we have all the people who are doing incredible work with online, who are commissioning and financing online work, and then some incredible filmmakers, including, I think we need to have a special round of applause for Nan Fu Wang, who just had the premiere of her film Hooligan Sparrow today. So we're extra doubly delighted to have you here. Okay, so I think I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, otherwise you're going to be hearing way too much from me. But just quickly, I'm Ingrid Kopp. I work as a consultant at the Tribeca Film Institute, and I now live in South Africa, where I'm doing interactive things in Africa. So it's really nice to be back at Sundance. Charlie, I'm going to start with you, since a lot of this was your doing.
Yes, exactly. The reason there's so many panelists is my fault for asking loads of people, but they're all good people. So I'm Charlie Phillips. I'm head of documentaries at The Guardian. My role primarily involves commissioning short documentaries of between 5 and 20 minutes for The Guardian, and those films can be from anyone in the world on any contemporary subject, and they go out across The Guardian globally and our other digital platforms like The Guardian's YouTube and Facebook. So there you go.
Fantastic. Yeah, just pass down the row.
Hi, my name is Nan Fu Wang. I'm from China, but I now live in New York City. And I have a featured documentary here called Hooligan Sparrow that just premiered at noon today. Yeah, and in July, I adapted a short doc from this feature and published on The Guardian.
I am Kathleen Lingo. I'm the series producer and curator of the New York Times OpDocs.
Hi, I'm Michael Palmieri, and I co-direct films with Donald Mosier. We made a film that's here at the festival. This is a short called Peace in the Valley that was produced by Field of Vision, which is Laura Poitras, AJ Schnack, and Charlie Cook.
And the film covers anti-discrimination ordinance in Arkansas, as well as the cast of an outdoor passion play happening simultaneously. And we were one of the first people, the first filmmakers commissioned by Field of Vision.
My own. Elaine McMillian Sheldon. I have worked with the New York Times OpDocs since 2013. Hope to work with them more, as well as Field of Vision and Guardian. I make feature and interactive work, and I'm here because of Chicken and Eggs Breakthrough Award.
I'm Charlotte Cook. I'm the co-creator of Field of Vision with Laura Poitras and AJ Schnack, and we are commissioning, funding, and publishing cinematic journalism. So we're looking for topical stories that are told in an artistic way.
So I think what we'll do is just start with a little bit. I know you've said a little bit about what The Guardian, New York Times, and Field of Vision does, but maybe, actually, Charlotte, maybe you could start with this a little bit. It's like how you're thinking about Field of Vision, maybe differentiating itself in terms of what you're creating online, or are you seeing yourselves as very much in the same space? Like, what is it about Field of Vision that is, special, particular? What is it that you're looking for from filmmakers? How are you covering contemporary stories?
I mean, I think in terms of how we relate to other people, we're really excited to be in this realm at the moment. Like, it's an incredible boom time for short docs online. So we're kind of just glad to be part of the gang at the moment. I think what we're really looking for, I mean, we do short one-offs, but we're also doing series in a big way. So we're really excited to do short-form episodic. And we have about 3 of those in production at the moment. So we really want to see how long-form can play over a period of time online. I think that's something we're really passionate about. But we're looking at exploring the artistic space within journalism online, and I think that's what we're looking. We're looking for any subject matter, but it's the tone we're looking for, I think.
And Kathleen, how about you in terms of like what it is that you think about when you're looking for films for OpDocs? Like, what is an OpDoc film? Is there a particular style that you're looking for? How do you think of yourselves in the online video space?
So OpDocs was conceived in the New York Times opinion section. So we very much try to keep in the spirit of having works that give points of view on the issues of the day, unique points of view on issues large and small, from terrorism and racism to hairstyles and dating. And we like to have that range of topics. And one of the really important things for OpDocs is that there are stories that are very visual. We look for a high level of storytelling, both in terms of the content and also how it looks, because it is film. One of the things, I recently took over OpDocs from Jason Spingarkoff, and one of the things I've been doing is going through all of our materials and removing the word video, because I really want to push forward that this is filmmaking. It's not video journalism, which is something in and of its own, but I think it's important to distinguish between the different genres. And with OpDocs, I always say to people, I want you to make something that looks like you would see it in a film festival, which is a way to distinguish it from something a lot of my colleagues do on the news side, which can be equally beautiful and important. But I do think that we are all creating a genre right now. We're all doing different things, of course, but in a way, what we're all trying to do is raise the level of storytelling and really do work on important and timely topics that's also really visual. And there goes my phone.
Throw down the mic. Charlie.
For us, the central thing is storytelling. We aim to work with films that are going to tell a complete story from beginning to end as much as possible. So it's more about being able to walk people through a story than perhaps a portrait or a character study. For us, I mean, similar to what Kathleen said, we really want to differentiate ourselves from the news team. So what we do doesn't have to be related to a current news story. It needs to be contemporary, but it can be something that's a bit more reflective and maybe something that's talking about something that was in the news a few months ago that might need reviving in people's minds. It's also really important for us that we bring new things to the attention of our audience. So we want to surprise them. We want to tell them something new. And with that kind of remit, it fits broadly into The Guardian's values. And I don't know if that's exactly journalism or not, but it's definitely bringing new information to people. So we try and do that. We try and tell great stories. We try and work with really great filmmakers. And as both Charlotte and Kathleen have said, we very much think of these as standalone films. They're not there to support the stories in the newspaper. They're there as standalone destination films, and I mean, just to echo what we've already heard, this is a really exciting, evolving genre.
So maybe we can hear from some of the filmmakers on, it's interesting that you're all coming from a new space. Like, even if you're not necessarily doing straight journalism responding to the news, you're still, The Guardian, the New York Times, and Field of Vision are responding to news stories. So how, as a filmmaker, is that... is that influencing the style of films you make? What about compliance issues? Like, how is it affecting the way, Elaine, maybe I could start with you. Do you, when you're making a film for OpDocs, are you making a film in a different way? Or have you sort of figured out a way to make the kinds of films you make, but just for the New York Times?
Well, I think the three different ways that we've worked together have all been different situations. So it's never been a single approach. The first one I did was I released an interactive documentary, and we wanted to put together a short film that would drive people to that site but give them a complete story within the New York Times website. And so we created a piece that was 7 voices from the 30 voices in the interactive documentary. So that had a specific goal to represent the project, but also to represent this community in a cohesive way. The second project I did was a memorial type piece for the Lives They Lived series they did. And we went to Ireland and recreated some of Seamus Heaney's poems. And so that was very magical in a sense. Like, that was scripted and completely different. Definitely had it didn't have straight journalism to it. It was definitely more magical. And the third one was an assignment. Jason called me and said, can you cover marijuana in Colorado? And within 3 days I was there and trying to figure out what the opinion was of these 2 different towns, and leaving 5 days later, trying to figure out what to do with the footage, and trying to make something that didn't feel like video journalism, did feel like a film, and that felt a bit more nuanced and a bit more questions left up in the air about what would happen. So it's been completely different every time.
How about with Field of Vision?
we just wanted to see the Southern drag queens and the big Jesus. But no, but seriously, a little bit. No, a little bit, a lot. But when they told us what was happening in Arkansas and where it was happening, and that they thought it would be a good fit, that was a really special.
A field division told you that.
Yeah, field division had the story. They commissioned us to go, it was a really unique experience for us to be commissioned and thrown into the field, but then also given full creative license to film what you wanted and to take the approach you want. So I think for us, the hardest part, or the new territory, was actually having to negotiate the length and the format, because these are new constraints, and when you encounter a subject that has so much rich material, then that's where we really felt we were in very new territory. We couldn't just get as much as we wanted. We had to trim it down, and then the feedback and between we as filmmakers and the institution providing the format was really, that's where it was it was a challenge for us, for sure. But it also made it very exciting, because you just, I don't know, you learn in short form, you have to learn to hone on the moments you love and then align them with the format itself. And I think for all of us, it's not just a short film, it's also an online short film. And that proposes a whole new set of criteria for what you keep, what you don't.
And did you have a deadline? I mean, were you given was it like, I need this on my desk by?
Well, I mean, they needed it by a certain time, but we were
Charlotte's nodding. You're being very vague.
No, it was just that we were commissioned very early, so we had the time to work on it. The interesting thing, when you asked us, the concept was basically cover this LGBT ordinance that's going on in Arkansas, but do what you do. And that was the most important thing for us, because it was, okay, now let's go look at that 100-foot tall statue of Jesus up on the hill and those crazy evangelicals that are doing weird stuff up there, and try to tie this into this story that they're asking us to make. So in some way, we're always just doing what we do, but shaping it to these different formats is a tricky and interesting thing. For me, the most interesting thing about it is, how do you keep the nuance, like you were talking about? You have to find a way of doing shorthand nuance so that you're not just answering all these questions for the audience. Mm-hmm. The most interesting films to me are the ones that leave you like asking a question at the end. And so how do you do that inside of something that's essentially, a topical piece? So you're trying to give people information, but you're trying to leave open the possibility that there's not everything has been said.
And how do you, as filmmakers, when you're making these pieces, do you sort of feel that they're a sort of sustainable art form in themselves, or are they sort of a path to making features? Like, how do you see them in your filmmaking practice?
For us?
Yeah, making short pieces.
Well, sometimes they're just shorts, because we've made shorts before, and they just seem like the short form is the right form. We're kind of like of the opinion that get out quicker and leave people wanting more, because it's always better than, staying at the party till the very, very end.
Right. But I guess what I'm getting at is like, it feels like, before there was such a sort of online docs surge, a lot of people were making short films on their way to making feature docs, and really feature docs were where you were ultimately trying to get to. But now there's a whole bunch of filmmakers who actually have careers where they're making mostly short content, and they don't necessarily want to make a feature doc. They don't see that as necessarily the pinnacle of documentary success, because there is this whole new space for short documentaries. Do you think?
Yeah, it's just follow. I think it's just follow the story. Like in this one, we're actually very interested in expanding it, because we think that there's more going on there, that it can work as a section of it could work as a short film, but we also saw the possibility of making it into a feature, which we're doing now. But they can coexist. So yeah.
And then for your piece that you did with Charlie was actually an excerpt from Hooligan Sparrow, right?
Right.
So what was that like?
Yeah, so that was interesting because when I made the short doc for The Guardian, I was already working on the feature doc, and I had a rough cut at the time. And just a little background of what the feature doc is about is a group of human rights activists in China who protested against the government's human rights violations and the price they paid. So many of the activists were arrested and persecuted. And one subject in the film is a human rights lawyer named Wang Yu. She is one of the 2 female human rights lawyers in China. And what happened is in July, she was arrested, and nobody knows where she was held, and there was no formal charge. And that story actually was covered by New York Times, CNN, Al Jazeera, a lot of but it's all in printed form. So there is no, human face to it. They only have 1 or 2 pictures of her. So you see tons of print articles, but you don't actually see this person or get a sense of who she is. And she is one of the main characters in my film. So I was thinking, and I care her so much, I was thinking if there is a way for me to create this short form content to show people who she is and what the controversy was and what she did. And I actually felt that making a short film is much harder than making a feature, because in 5 minutes, you have to tell the story from beginning to end. And especially in this case, her story was so complex. It's what cases she defended, what kind of person she is, why she was arrested. And I struggled a lot to fit all the content into that short doc. Yeah.
And were you worried that having that short doc out last year was going to affect the surprise of the film you were making? Were you worried about letting people know that there was this film?
I was certainly warned by a lot of people, don't show any footage online before your feature film premieres, because it could affect a lot of things, distribution and a lot of things. And I debated, and at the time, for me, the most important is for her to get freedom, and anything else compared to that. She's still in jail, and she faces a sentence of up to from 15 years to life sentence. So compared to that, I felt like distribution or anything else is not important. So that was my goal at the time, to get it out as soon as possible.
Good answer. Yeah. So, Charlie, maybe you could talk a little bit about how. I'm trying to ask the question without saying rights and money in a really brutal way. But maybe you could talk a little bit about how do you commission filmmakers? Do they come to you with a finished piece? At which point do you get involved? And then also, could you talk about the rights and the money?
Okay,
thanks.
So much to talk about. Okay, so we were evolving what we're doing at the moment. For the first year of the time that I was running Guardian documentaries, we'd take anything at any stage, really. So it was a mix of original commissions and work in progress versions of not released feature docs, and then we also did some cut downs of finished feature docs. We're changing that to focus more on original commissions as well as some work in progress versions. And that's just in reaction to looking at what's done well, and also to some extent the rights situation, which is quite complicated if it's a finished feature doc. So basically anyone can approach me with a film at any stage. I don't want people to be put off if it's not completely original and all unshot, but we are trying to move towards commissioning things from scratch, or certainly from early stage, because I think we just get more richer films that way. And then to move on to the money and the rights, the money that we give filmmakers depends how much the film costs, just to evade that question. But no, I mean, I would like it. So we've paid, I think the lowest end that we've put into a film has been £1,000. And that's really if most of it's been shot and it's a re-editing job. From at this point, the most that we would put in a film could be as much as £17,000 or £18,000, possibly even as much as 20. But that would be in an exceptional case where it's going to be 20 minutes long and it all needs to be shot and it's going to be incredible. can be anywhere within that scale. It really depends, like how much of the film needs to be shot, where it's being shot, how exclusive the story is, what the film's going to look like, how successful we think it's going to be on site. Lots of these things. But we'll have that negotiation with the filmmaker. In terms of rights, the standard model, if we've basically put all the money into the film, is that we take pretty much all the rights, just to put it out there. But if we put in less money, or if the film is intended to be a feature doc down the line, then there's lots of things that we can chip away at in the rights. So certainly if it's intended to be a feature doc, then we won't keep derivative rights. If there's a particular distribution plan that the filmmaker has for the film, like if you have a particular festival plan, or if you've got a particular intention for selling it to TV slots for shorts, then we can totally negotiate on that. There's just a balancing act basically in terms of the money that The Guardian puts into it. If it seems like we're not getting any rights back and there's no possibility of selling it on, then that becomes a harder sell for me with the management at The Guardian. So it's something that it's quite a subtle negotiation at the moment, but we will adapt our rights model depending on what the filmmaker's intending to do with it.
Okay, Charlotte, how does it work with you?
So we're actively doing kind of half assignments and half commissions. So we want people to definitely pitch us, but we're also really looking for stories we want to tell and the interesting people we think could tell those stories. And that goes beyond filmmakers too. We're looking at artists and photographers and data artists and anyone who we think could tell a really interesting story. In terms of the other, so it was rights, and what was the other bit of money? That one. I'm not going to say the money purely because we're only in our first 3 months, but we pay for what they cost. And that includes the filmmaker taking a fee. The joy of working with 2 other filmmakers to build this was we built it with filmmakers in mind. So we absolutely do that, to the point where we've had a couple of projects where they've lowballed us and we've upped the budget, which is a really nice position to be in, to be able to do that. In terms of rights, filmmakers keep all the rights. They keep the rights to the film, they keep the rights to the rushes. We essentially buy a license period from them, and that's it. And we have a revenue split should it sell elsewhere, and that's it.
Great, thank you. Kathleen?
I don't know, I can't answer. So with OpDocs, we have a model where we offer a few $1,000s. That's always what I say. But in terms of our rights, we're very generous. We ask for a joint copyright or a license, depending on what the situation is. We ask for a 30-day exclusive online premiere. We do ask for rights in perpetuity because as the New York Times, we're the paper of record, we would never unpublish a piece of content. So I always am really upfront with filmmakers about that. But I hope they see that as part of the value of publishing with the New York Times, is that your OpDoc will forever be part of the New York Times. And that can be a really valuable thing for filmmakers to help them find a large audience for their work. And we also work a lot with filmmakers on making sure their OpDoc does get seen, and we don't feel it's over once we press publish. We have an OpDoc in the festival, we have OpDocs, we have events. So we really try to keep the life of the OpDocs going, and we really feel like our filmmakers are our family. As like Elaine knows, I always try to keep in touch with filmmakers. I know there's at least one other OpDoc filmmaker here. We really have, well, actually more than one. I can see a few. It's something that we also have a lot of input creatively with many OpDocs, not all. It's a really rich collaboration where filmmakers have an opportunity to not only put something on a platform like the New York Times, but also work with Times editors in thinking about their stories, of course, how to tell the story and how's this going to work? Is this scene really functioning? But also to the level of fact checking. Our fact checker, Lindsay Krause, has literally fact checked every single OpDoc. She just, I think, is probably the first person in the world who's fact checked virtual reality films. She just did 3. So that I think is also part of the value for filmmakers of having that experience, of having someone say to you, like, does this really make sense? How are you thinking about that? What's your source? And then, of course, we also publish a director's statement with our OpDocs, which gives a filmmaker the chance to write about their work. And that can also be a value add because, say, if it is it's related to an existing feature, you can, of course, mention that feature. But also, it's just another chance, again, to have that interaction with Times editors and in really kind of like upping your game. I hope that doesn't sound like braggy or anything, but we really try to push filmmakers and work with them to make really, really excellent content that we all feel really, really proud about.
And do you feel like for you as filmmakers, this is now, I mean, like Elaine, actually, it's interesting. Like, I feel like, you know, you've actually created a sort of a film career that is very different to a lot of filmmakers where you haven't, you know, made the feature docs and there's, you've actually like put together a really diverse sort of portfolio of work for different publications. Do you think that that's going to be happening more and more and more, and that a lot more of these outlets will operate for filmmakers, or do you see this as a sort of a current blip that will go away and we'll go back to, is the current online documentary space growing? I guess is what I'm asking. Do you see your place?
I think it's the new model. I think it's one of the new models. I think there's many new models. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we have to respond to how audiences, what they want, where they're watching things. How they want to watch things, and we have to adapt to that. And I think that my career has been largely based on sneaking in back doors of places. And I did make a feature, and then I made it interactive, and I made shorts and exhibits and weird things. And I love the short form. I think it allows me to, if there's a topic that I'm interested in, but I'm not willing to invest 2.5 years of my life in, I can go there and be part of it and express it in a way, and maybe even in a new creative way that I'm not going to be able to do in a feature film. The investment and the risk is lower, and it's a lot more fun sometimes to make these shorts. But they are still challenging, so I enjoy the short form a lot.
And actually, that goes back to what you guys were saying about what the needs of the story and the story finding the space it needs. But of course, that's kind of true, except that the industry formats also dictate the shape the format needs to be in. I mean, if you're making a film for TV and they need a 52-minute slot, then your story is going to need to find a 52-minute shape, right? And so I'm wondering now, like, do you think creatively this is actually opening up more space for documentary stories to be told in the way that they need to be told? Like, do you think that actually now there is maybe different kinds of stories that can be told because they don't need to be particular lengths necessarily?
I think, yeah, and I think a lot of times as a filmmaker, like you said, there'll be a subject that just, it captures your magpie attention, and you know that you could do something really gorgeous with it for yourself, you know, and you're passionate, but your passion is limited because you have that feature, and you also have to pay the bills with whatever work you're doing. So this is a new space where you can do it, and like working for, you know, you can get paid, and you have an audience. And that alone, I think a lot of filmmakers have been daunted by doing short work because you might get it into a festival, and you have to put a lot of work into getting into a festival, and then there's no future really for it. And so just knowing that you can play with the form, you can be more liberated, and you can address subjects which you care about but aren't the primary passion. And you'll still get paid, and people will see it. I mean, having an audience is the biggest thing. And it's also, I think, because people are willing to be more, I think audiences are willing to go into more experimental territory or less conservative territory with a short film. So I think this is an opportunity to slowly open the way documentary viewers view all documentaries. So it's a game of anticipating what the audience wants to see, but also a chance to maybe get a broader range of viewership.
Are you seeing, I mean, and this is for anyone, are you seeing that there are more spaces outside of the news space for short documentary content online, which would allow for more, you know, maybe more experimental, are there outlets like that around? There are? Yeah. Like what?
So, I mean, there are outlets like Nowness, which I follow actively because I think the work they're making really hits, and, you know, they cover art and culture, but in a really, really beautiful way. I feel like almost every day I stumble across a different site doing something where I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So it really is this moment where if you had a film that you're going to execute well, I think you'll find a home for it online in some fashion. And it's really surprising what the audience is like. I mean, just before Christmas, we published our first episodic series, and we had no idea what that was going to be like. And what was most eye-opening for me was instantly, because we publish everywhere. We kind of publish on our site and Vimeo and YouTube and Facebook, and we just want to spread them as far as we possibly can. And instantly people were getting in touch saying, can we translate this into Russian? Can we translate this into Spanish? And within about 3 days, we had 4 more languages added to all of the films. And to have the wider community and audience do that for us was absolutely amazing.
So actually, yeah.
Actually, I was just going to add that this is a coup, right? The piece about the Greek financial crisis, just as a viewer, like I'm not talking about it as a filmmaker, just as a viewer, when I started watching that, I just binge watched it, like all 4 episodes, because they dropped them all at the same time, which in some level is kind of following the ways in which people watch things on Netflix, et cetera. So I think the modes of watching are shifting and changing, and I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, because I was actually one of the things me and Charlie were talking about when we were talking about this panel is, with the Jinx and Making of a Murderer and these slightly more longer form series, how short form series online can actually really tap into that binge watching. And it just feels like we're only just touching the sides of what's possible there, it feels like. And I mean, also with audio, with Serial, like there are all these, say.
I mean, I was just going to say, we have to be really careful with this because there keeps being articles being like, it's the new thing. But all of those 3 things are true crime. And I think there is an inbuilt audience for true crime. So it's still very untested as to whether episodic is going to work. And I say that as someone trying to champion episodic, but we don't know. And I think Netflix have done an incredible job, but nothing's kind of broadened out beyond kind of where there are audiences already. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens. And I believe there is an audience. I don't think we would be doing it if we didn't, but I think it is very uncharted waters at the moment.
Yeah, certainly we're not really doing it at the moment. It's been something I've been thinking about for the whole of the time that I've been at The Guardian, and I would like to try it, but I guess I've been, similar to what Charlotte's saying, I've been a bit nervous about who the audience would be for this, beyond true crime, especially on a platform like The Guardian, where people maybe aren't expecting documentaries. So I think it's great that Field of Vision are doing this, because it's kind of research for all of us, and if it works, we'll all do it. No, seriously, I think that there is potentially massive potential in it beyond true crime, as long as people know about it. As long as Making a Murderer just went crazy, and the whole world knew about it. And I think you have to get to a certain level of attention for people to kind of spend enough time on each of the parts to actually commit to it.
I mean, what if it was? Sorry, now I'm just like brainstorming how we could make episodic work. But I mean, there must be other ways of doing it, just because true crime is what's been done so far. I mean, I'm just thinking about what I like to call what the fuck docs, where I'm thinking Catfish, but I mean, there are lots of examples where something's not quite right, but you're not quite sure what it is. It wouldn't necessarily need to be true crime to keep someone's attention and make them binge watch.
No, and I think, This Is a Coup is really interesting for us. It's a film about the Greek financial crisis, but the thing that really helped was the person leading those films and who produced them was a journalist called Paul Mason, who works with The Guardian a lot, who is seen as one of the best economic thinkers in the world. And so people came with a sense of trust because his hands were on this. And it had a Greek director as well, so that brought in the Greek audience. And so we just tried to craft it in a way that we kind of felt there was an audience there already, but we were showing that story in a different way. And the reason that we published it when we did was we were trying to influence the Spanish election a little bit, well, not the election itself, but people who were voting, because Spain was about to potentially go through the same thing that Greece was. So the idea was just get it out super fast and see what would happen. And we published in Spanish as well, with a Spanish voiceover to try and do that, and that created doubled the audience instantly.
So that actually brings me to my next question, which is this idea of global and how now with these online... Yes, of course, yes.
So OpDocs, we have a number of series that have done extremely well, but they're not episodic in the sense of story building. They do it differently. So we have The Conversation on Race, which is a series that very much builds episode to episode, and each episode, when you watch them together, is a whole. The first one, it was a conversation with my black son, which is parents of African American boys talking about what it's like to give them the talk. The next episode is a conversation with the sons. And then the next one is a conversation with white people on race. And then we had police, and then we had black women, and coming up we have 2 more, which I won't mention the topics of because I don't know if the filmmakers want me to, but on other races. And then that series was such a success, and the comments were so strong that actually when we published the first one, it influenced how the filmmakers made the next ones. And then we built a story wall where we've gotten hundreds of submissions from the public with their stories on race. So that's like another approach. It's not episodic storytelling like Serial is, but it's episodically building on a conversation and an audience. And then another series we have is Animated Life, which is one of my favorite things ever because it's stories about scientific discovery told with paper puppets. And the directors actually hired professional puppeteers to tell the stories of Alfred Russel Wallace, Mary Leakey, about moments of great discovery. And that is a series that has found an audience and found a following also. So I think when we think about series and episodic storytelling, like there's different ways of doing it. And one of the really exciting things of that Charlotte and Charlie and I get to do is like experiment with what those forms can be. And also because it's so much more interactive now as editors. You know, back in the day, like you get a letter through the letter section. I mean, we still have letters people at the Times, like it still exists. But with the comments, they're so like rapid that they influence both how us as commissioners and also filmmakers think about how to build their stories out.
That's a great point, actually, that series don't need to be episodic necessarily. And actually, you can build audiences in really interesting ways with series. And so I guess, going back to this idea of global, like what is possible now when these pieces can go anywhere? And like you say, this also raises issues about like what languages you put them out in. And like, I mean, in some ways that can be fantastic because if you're tapping into a global story, it can truly reach a global audience. But I would imagine also it can get you into a lot of trouble, right? Because you can be publishing, I mean, I'm not necessarily referring to your piece, but it means that these pieces are very, very easy to find. And everyone will know exactly what you're making. So I would assume if you're making a project like Hooligan Sparrow, that can actually could put either you in some danger, but it can also put your subject in some danger, right? You don't necessarily want, people to know that you're making the film.
Right. If it was like early on, I wouldn't want to be like outside there, and so the government know I was doing it. But the time when I published was already late at the stage, so it didn't matter that much. But I was a little bit afraid, like after the piece was published, I was monitoring like Twitter and also any Chinese media to see if they have any reaction to it.
Right.
Yeah, I think there wasn't much, so.
And I mean, even when there are, I'm saying this now as someone who lives in South Africa, even when there are geo-blocked websites, VPNs, I mean, anyone who can't get access to those will use VPNs. So, I mean, once you publish something online, it's available everywhere. There is no geographic border. So I think that must be quite interesting in terms of, how you get like, for example, The Guardian now is an international brand. And do you think about that when you're publishing pieces? Like, who are your audiences?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Our audience is completely global and increasingly global. And so when I'm commissioning the films, I do have to think about what's going to appeal to a global audience. And we wouldn't really work with docs that are only specific to the UK or only specific to the US. And the films just never do as well if they're too geographically specific. And that includes films about the UK. So we do have to think a lot about it. But having said that, I feel like when we look at the audience statistics for our films, there's often no real pattern between them. It's not completely random, like you try and look for lessons, but certainly in terms of the geography, it's so diverse, sometimes it's so bizarre, and you'll see spikes with a particular film in a completely random place because someone influential has happened to tweet it. But just going back to the point about geo-blocking, we We don't geo-block on The Guardian. It's available to everyone everywhere. And it does mean that, for example, with your film and a couple of other films we've done, we do have to think about what might happen given the fact that a story that may be seen to be, like politically only important for a certain country is now being exposed on one of the world's main news sources, and we can't really underestimate the impact that might have. But that can be really hard to predict. I mean, with yours, it seemed like, it didn't get you into trouble, but we've had a couple of others where there has been some comeback, and we have to take that really seriously.
And do you, like Field of Vision, do you put the films everywhere, or do they stay very much within The Guardian?
No, they're on our YouTube and our Vimeo and our Facebook. And when we think about The Guardian's digital audience, we think about all of those platforms. And actually our viewing stats tend to be often better on those other platforms rather than on The Guardian. I mean, it depends on the film, but that's lots of factors. I mean, that's partly to do with how the films are promoted and our player and lots of things that we don't have time to get into now. Do
you have budgets, though, to promote the films, like within The Guardian? Like, I mean, is there a marketing...
No, I am the marketing team. Well, no, I mean there is. We've got an audience team who make sure that the SEO is really good on it, that we do social around it. But in terms of what I might regard as traditional documentary marketing and outreach and all of that really falls upon me to do. And one of the things going forward is that I want us to be able to do more of that and work with the filmmakers more in advance on how we can do that.
And are you at The Guardian studying, are people looking at it on mobile, on desktop? Do you look at all of that stuff and have all that stats?
Yeah. So on The Guardian as a whole, smartphone and tablet are just on the rise and are higher than desktop. With the documentaries, the trend isn't as dramatic as that. There's a higher proportion of people watching on desktop than there is for the whole of the rest of the site. But that's not completely surprising because the films are longer than any of our other videos. But it can be a challenge thinking about smartphone consumption of the films because often they are 15 minutes or even longer. And so that's not going to be something necessarily you'd watch on your commute. So when we do think about how we market the films, we have to think a lot about when we launch them and also maybe when we tweet about it the second time to try and catch people on the way home so they might watch them before they cook their dinner or before they go to bed.
And does it bother you that people are watching your documentaries on their commute on the way home on little tiny phones?
Oh. No, not at all, actually. I mean, I think it'd be awesome if everybody could see things in a theater and you make things to work large. We make things work large because we make feature docs and stuff, but they should always work small, I think. I mean, you're editing oftentimes on a small screen, you're editing for large. I mean, I think that's gone. I mean, I think people should try to see the things in any way that they want to see them. That's not a problem to me.
But I guess festivals can still provide a space where you can see those films on a big screen with an audience in a cinema, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's ideal, sure. I mean, because you put all this time into, it's more sound design than anything that you're putting all the effort into to get the nuance of that sort of stuff through, as well as picture. But, in the end, it's got to work. It's got to work on all these different platforms because ultimately, how many few thousands of people are going to see it, at a film festival? And then if you're lucky enough to get the release, the small documentary release, it does okay, more people are going to see it on their computers anyway, on their televisions. So I think these things, it's okay that people are watching them there. It doesn't bother me at all.
I think sometimes it does bother me a little bit. There are shots, there's just, sometimes you get a beautiful shot and you think about how it looks big and how it sounds big. And that shot, will not have any impact on a small thing. But the balance is, at least for us, the heart of the films we're making are characters. And if you do right by your characters and you get really good character moments, then the format doesn't matter. We're all going to respond to those people, whether you're watching them this big or whether they're blown up. And so you might, you gain one thing in one form, and I really think in the end cinema is very powerful. And there are a lot of films that are insanely beautiful, and you're trapped in them while you see them. You're taken by them, and then you walk out and they're gone. You know. And then there are a lot of films that are not very beautiful, or they work very well small and you know in a personal format, and you get a relationship with that character, and you will stay with that person. So it's a balance.
But really quickly, like, you know, Brian, just to throw a different thing on it, like Brian Eno, whenever he would finish a record, he would always take it and put it on a cassette tape and then put it in like the worst, you know, tape deck in a car and go, sounds good, you know. And like if it works there, then it's going to work. Like that's just the only thing I was trying to make a distinction with. But see it large if you can.
I agree. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I don't think you can resist that anymore.
No. And it does seem, I mean, I do just, you know, talking to all of you and knowing all of you, it does feel like there is and I know it can be a real struggle. I mean, it's not like we've sorted out like how for everyone to make a living in documentaries, but it does feel like there are lots and lots of different ways of telling documentary stories now, and that can only be a good thing. And if different audiences are also able to watch those stories and experience those characters, you know, they might not be appreciating that beautiful shot, and they might not be appreciating the sound design, but they are going to be appreciating the work in some way. And I think, you know, sorry, I'm the moderator. I should stop having. But there is still a lot of snobbery around documentaries and how documentaries should be, and sometimes this work does butt up against that. But I think that's really, it's good, right? Because it's also we're being faced with how things are as opposed to how we might want them to be.
I mean, it's about getting to an audience. What I really like about the job I do is that I feel like I can show more people documentaries than would normally get to see them. And I know from working in the festival world for years that you sort of live in this bubble of thinking that these films are amazing and everyone knows about them and, you know, everyone should watch them. And then you realise that there's like a few thousand people in the world who will ever see these films in most cases, even films that are really incredible. And so I really like it that I feel like all of us are bringing documentary to a mass market, but still doing it with really credible films. Like, we're not putting crap out there. We're putting really good docs out, but we're thinking about how to reach as many people as possible.
But so I totally agree, and I think that's interesting about reaching audiences. But do you think you're actually pushing the form as well? Like, is the documentary form growing, and you know, is there actually creative documentary stuff happening as well as just reaching more audiences? Because I think those are two different things. Did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're having really a lot of fun playing with. I mean, if anyone's seen Laura Puich's work, which I'm sure most of you have, I mean, she is a very creative but journalistic filmmaker. And to try and kind of play around with that space online is actually really fun. I mean, one of the films we first showed called The Above by Kirsten Johnson, which is amazing. Some of the comments on that site, because we do operate within the Intercept, and they're our sister company, and so they're used to very investigative, hard journalism. And some of the comments were like, this is not a documentary. And it's really fun. Like, that's what I want to happen. And then you see the comment board exploding where they're all trying to figure out what they think of this thing because it's not what they're used to seeing. And I think that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to really play with audiences and see what they perceive, how reality is shown to them. And if we can help shift that and, you know, mess with people's perceptions of that. And I mean, as a programmer before doing this, I loved challenging audiences because people really love it. It's great when you see something you've never seen before in a way, or a story told in a way you've never seen before. And I think that's what's really fun, is we can all really experiment with that and see what people react to and how they react to it.
One of the joys of my job is working with directors, and they come oftentimes, directors who are used to working in long form, they come to OpDocs. Like right now, we're working on a series of shorts that are going to be published on Monday with some directors who have features in the festival. And at first, they're always like, how can I make a short for my film? And then they pitch me like a summary of their film in 5 or 10 minutes. I'm like, no, can you think of a way of telling a story that's not in the feature, it's completely original, and stands on its own? And then I hear this like, oh, wait. And then it gets like creatively interesting and like, what was a point I really wanted to make in the feature that I couldn't make, and so I'm gonna make it in a short. And like within that space is when you start to get cool experimentation. Like a few years ago, we did a short with Rich Hill, which was a feature in the festival, and they made an op-doc called Sarah's Uncertain Path, and it was the same thing. Like, how are we going to do this? And now they're making a feature on Sarah from that short. So I think a lot of times people think shorts, or it's related to a feature, or it's just a short doc, but that's totally wrong. There's I could just keep going with listing directors who've come to us, made something, and then it's like led them in a whole new direction, or thinking in short form. Laura Poitras went on to do Field of Vision. I mean, she's very honest about that. It's a really fantastic creative exercise to not only make something in short form, but to put it online, to get the audience response, to work with a news organization that's not, an HBO or these other more traditional forms. Like, there's so many things about it that are new that it's the most exciting thing is what it does for the directors and the creativity, and like the audience, whatever, like they come to it and they love it. But for me, that's the most exciting part of the short space, is seeing how the creators come up with their content.
I just remembered one of my first jobs was with the Washington Post documentary video department, which doesn't exist anymore, and Alexandra Garcia actually works with you now. But they were doing this type of stuff in 2007, 2008, 2009, before online video, before people were watching a lot of video online. And the program was defunded, and we lost our office, and they were put in the Washington Post building, and it was said to be a failed, this is not worth investing in. And so for me, coming from journalism and then colliding with film, I think it's thrilling to be part of a new form of journalism that does want to be cinematic and does want to push that form, but still is ethical and accurate. And those things, that's where I think journalism should continue to push towards, to reach more audiences and to tell more interesting stories that reach more diverse audiences.
How do you see this work in terms of all the other stuff happening in interactivity, like virtual reality, for example, or interactive, more multimedia interactive storytelling? Like, do you see this as being part of that, or is it very much its own thing and it's much more from the documentary space?
I mean, I think both the New York Times and the Guardian have been incredible at telling stories in interactive ways. I mean, I always am excited when I see the big projects they put out. We have some data artists on staff at the Intercept who are also trying to figure out different ways. And I think all of us probably just want to get stories out in beautiful, creative ways.
But you could do a Field of Vision documentary in VR, for example.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
And actually, going from that, would you be able to collaborate with each other? Like, can you collaborate with other funds? Could you co-fund projects?
I mean, yeah, we're figuring this out right now, just because some of our series are quite ambitious, and we actually think that there's probably space for us to distribute elsewhere, and actually really we want to do what's best for the film. So if we feel like the best thing is for a first window to be with someone else, we're really open to that, depending on what the project is. So really we just want to get the films out in the best way.
And could you, for example, work with the foundation if they put some money in?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, we can work with foundations, we can work with brands, we can work with most people. Like, there's a kind of code of who the Guardian can and can't work with. It's kind of common sense, basically. In terms of working with Field of Vision or with OpDocs, in theory, I think it's a really good idea. I think we'd have to work out, or people probably above us
would have to get our bosses to agree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the legal working out of it could take decades. I think we probably could. We'll talk about it. We'll report back next year.
Because we're ready to play our...
No, I think, I mean, like in seriousness, I think that there's probably some overlap in our audiences, but I think there's also audiences that maybe we each have to ourselves. And I think that generally, especially for a bigger, more expensive project, it'd be a really cool idea. And I really love the symbolic idea of us collaborating as well.
Yeah, and I mean, OpDocs has relationship with Sundance, MacArthur, Chicken and Egg, to fund filmmakers. And just having gone through my first experience working directly with VR, just to bring that into it. And also interactives, I think it's a completely different beast. And I think everyone needs to be honest about how much work it is, and that just because you've made a documentary doesn't mean you can make a VR film or an interactive. They're completely different storytelling. you need to know the genre. It's like when a journalist makes a documentary. You know, some journalists can do it, some can't. Just because you're a journalist doesn't mean you can make a documentary or direct one. And so I just want to like sound a note of caution, because especially with VR, it's the shiny thing. I want to do it too, don't get me wrong. But the more that I think about it, it's a completely different intellectual problem than making a documentary is. And it's not just how can we fit a documentary into a 360-degree storytelling space. Like, it's not that. So yeah, I don't think it's the same thing at all. I think it's a completely different way of looking at the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of echo that. At The Guardian, we have different people who do interactive. It's not really within our remit. Fran is, I think, somewhere in the room. There she is, yeah. So Fran's here with 6x9, which is a VR solitary project in New Frontiers across the road. It's amazing. But that's a different part of The Guardian. I mean, Fran's a specialist in that. So although it's something that I am really interested and really passionate about, I think it's quite a good idea to keep the things quite separate, although we do talk a lot.
I mean, OpDocs, we are doing interactive and VR. It's more that I don't think that I think the creative minds that can do, like I said, it's a different intellectual process. So when people approach it creatively, I've been getting a lot of pitches lately from documentary filmmakers, and for VR and interactive. And I think when you look at the people that do those things really well, they often don't also make documentaries. And I think that's like a really important distinction.
Would you make a virtual reality piece? Do you see that as being part of your work?
It actually, I mean, I think VR is amazing, but it terrifies me as a filmmaker because I want to dictate what you see. Just as a filmmaker, I'm trying to convey something through a series of images that you are being led through, by the filmmaker. And VR is scary because it's a totally different set of tools, like you were saying. There's no comparison. I am interested in it, very interested in it, but it's getting my head around those. How do you let go of those ideas and find different ways of leading the audience in certain directions? Totally different problem.
Yeah, I think you'd have to consider the subject and how immersive the subject needs to be to communicate the essence of what you want to tell, or if it's an interactive field, again, you have to let the subject dictate. And I think some subjects want interactivity or they want an immersive environment, and sometimes the subjects of the story, or the story itself, the subject of the story, not the characters within, that really kind of demands a little more physically passive and mentally active viewing. Like, there are times when I want to be able to engage and fire on all fronts, and there are times when I really want to sit back and I really want to see what this filmmaker, how they interpreted the thing, because I love the way they interpret the thing. So, it's an exciting idea for me, but I have yet to think of the subject that would make me want to really put the work into it.
And Elaine, as someone who's gone through the interactive ringer, and you know how much work it is, I mean, how do you feel about like how a lot of this online short work fits in the interactive spectrum? Because I know Hollow was a crazy amount of work.
It was, and there wasn't enough money, and I wouldn't do it again the same way we did it. If I'd do it again, I'd partner with the New York Times or someone, and they have the infrastructure and the teams there to really build it out. And I mean, Hollow was not me, it's a team of designers and developers that are smarter than myself, and it's a collaboration. It can't be seen as, it's not the same thing as a one-woman band shooting her documentary like I am many times. It's purely collaboration, and depends on the melding of minds that think differently. They see story differently, they understand it, and they taught me a lot. So yeah, it's a beast. It's not a small undertaking at all, and we paid $700 a month to keep Hollow up and running until we sold it to a university library. And so unless you're planning on doing that, you better get some partners to work with, like Field of Vision or New York Times, that are willing to host that and maintain it and make sure that it's archived and the audience can access it for years to come.
How about you, Nanfu? Do you see yourself working in an interactive mode, or do you see yourself very much as a filmmaker?
Totally. I want to make a VR. Like that would be my next. I want to be like next door, next, just out of curiosity. And I really want to try the process. And I think I can decide whether I like it or not after I make one.
Yeah, fantastic. So we can take some questions. I know there's probably a lot of things we haven't covered. I'll come to you in a second. The one thing I just wanted to say is we've got roving mics, so please just wait for the mics, just so this is being recorded. And the other thing is we didn't show any material, but the good news is it's all online. So you can go and watch any of these films. Go to The Guardian, go to OpDocs, go to Field of Vision. Everything's online. All the films that we mentioned are online. So you can go and do that afterwards. All right, there's a question over here, I think. Have you got a mic? Great.
Thank you very much. Interesting conversation. I was wondering, what are the metrics to measure the success of an online documentary?
I mean, that's a really difficult question. I think it really depends on. I mean, right now we have no idea. We've only been going for 3 months, so every film has performed slightly differently, and we don't really care about metrics too much. We want people to watch them, but we're not judged by them in any way, and we don't commission based on that. I've talked to a lot of different online people. I don't think there is a definitive, this is what success means. I think it depends on the filmmaker's objectives and what we hope, where it reaches. I think that's really, it would depend on what you wanted to happen, whether it was successful or not.
What about those 3 rules for the advertising?
I mean, what I would say about that is, what define metrics? In my job, I do not have to check how many people have watched an OpDoc. No one asks me to do that. If I want to look, I can, but I often don't. The way that I judge are comments, but it's also who's judging. Is it the filmmaker? Did it help them raise their profile? Is it a filmmaker who really cares about an issue and it pushed that issue forward? So I think the word metric it's like kind of a catch-all phrase, but what do you mean? Like what are you trying to evaluate? How many people saw it? How much of an impact it had? I mean, that's a qualitative thing, and it depends on what you want your impact to be. Do you want it to be political? Do you want it to affect change in Washington? Do you want to change people's attitudes? So, in terms of like social media, how many shares, likes, comments, all of that is it. But I think it's really like you get a general overall impression in the months. It's not even like immediate, in the months, in the year after you publish the film.
I'm just going to jump in, sorry. This would be a really interesting question to ask Mike and Donald, because the Intercept's privacy policy means we don't actually track who's watching certain things. So we have a very, very limited understanding of how many people are watching things. And so I don't even know how you felt about that, of not knowing, and the life of the film. Yeah, no, we don't. The Intercept has a very, very strict policy about taking data from people who visit the site. So we don't really, when it goes out into other platforms, we know, but in terms of how it performs, we have very limited knowledge. And I don't know how you felt about that.
We were really disappointed because we could only track likes on Facebook, and there weren't that many. No, in the end, we were just happy to have a platform where we knew that there was an audience who would see it. Now, how much? If you go into filmmaking worrying about how many people are going to see it, especially if you're going to documentary filmmaking, then don't, right? That was never an issue. But I think it is a pressure that we all feel, though. Where, I want to know, but then against my own judgment and my own standards, I don't look.
I do. I look just because it's like, oh, come on, it's there. You look. When we're talking about, say, when it plays on YouTube and stuff like that, you look, and it's always the thing I always think about is how many people finished it. That's for me. That's the question for this stuff. It's like, what is the threshold that somebody is going to watch something? Is it 6 minutes? Is it 8 minutes? Is it 12 minutes? Is it 15? Is it 40? We don't know that yet, but.
Wait.
Well, no.
I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, but actually, I wanted to say something
do.
before you say that, because you guys actually gave us information about that, about sort of the ways in which you analyze analytics, that there's a threshold that's like between 12 and 15. That's the outer limits, which is how we ended up shaping things.
Everybody disagrees
But
on
yes.
Exactly. Yeah. We're like jumping in there. We get so much data at the Guardian about who watches what and how long everyone watches for, and I think I've probably got more pressure on me than you two do to kind of have those numbers. But on the other hand, I also think that the way that we promote the docs and that our player and lots of other stuff, without wanting to slag it off too much, like I think that there's more that we could be doing for the docs, and so I would be reluctant to kind of look at a film and go, well, people didn't watch the whole 15-minute film, when maybe they didn't know it was going to be 15 minutes when they started. Maybe we didn't flag to them that this might be something that you want to watch in an evening. And in terms of the general data that's out there and how long people will watch an online film for, it's all really contradictory. I mean, it's so contextual. It's different in different age groups. It's different in different countries. It's different with different subjects. I think if you commission based on data and kind of getting obsessed with metrics, then you're not going to end up commissioning the best films.
But you are still very much looking at the data, and you can see like how long people are watching films, and you're probably going to make some commissioning decisions based on that, right?
Yeah, but probably in the sense that I wouldn't want to commission a year of niche documentaries, but I might be happy to have some that I acknowledge may not get as watched as much as some other ones, because I want us to have a variation within the strand. So it does come into considerations, but I wouldn't want it to be the only thing that I think about. And just, I mean, in terms of the metrics that we look at for the films, the easiest one to look at is the number of views, especially with the amount of data that we get. But it's a very blunt tool, and there are more qualitative metrics. Just like, is it a good film? Did we get an amazing message out? Was it great working with this filmmaker who will come back and bring great stories to us in future? That to me is really important, and not just the figures, which are such a blunt tool.
Okay, great. Anyone else with a question? If you just pass the mic back. Sure, I think there's a question in the back.
Hello. So I run an artist services organization, and we work with a lot of filmmakers in New Orleans. And I feel like there is a growing tension between this kind of newer embracing of a short format online delivery documentary that's affiliated with journalism, and the traditional 5-year investment, build a documentary by having long-term relationships that you build the trust on. We have quite a few examples of locals in New Orleans who are getting hired to make short pieces for the Intercept, for Vice, et cetera. And we have quite a few stories of people who've started projects 2 years ago only to find someone else hired by the Intercept or Vice to come in and do a 3-minute piece that gets turned around, or they're listed as a fixer on it, and it feels frustrating to them. And I'm wondering what you think about this evolving model as creators, and if you feel there is a tension, or if there's not a tension, if the old school filmmakers just need to get with it, or what?
This terrifies me. I mean, some of the stories I've heard, and I think I know the story that you're meaning, especially in New Orleans. We have to be really careful with this stuff. I mean, especially when you are trying to break stories and you're telling, there are filmmakers who have had that access for a really long time. And I think it's up to us to do our due diligence of like kind of who is in this space is working in that way, and not to swoop in. And if because the people who the film is being made about largely know that they're working with someone, and I think we just have to be really careful, because there have been a number of real horror stories about online shorts or online platforms coming in and swooping and taking a story, and I think we just have to be really, really careful about that. Yeah.
But that may just be the case of like finding out who's making that story and potentially working with them, right?
Yeah, and I think you have to make sure, I mean, we're really keen, I'm sure all of us are, is to make sure people are telling their own stories. So it's not just parachuting people into an area that they don't understand. I think it's making sure, if we can, wherever possible, getting somebody from that area or who understands the subtleties of a situation to tell that story.
Right, because I think maybe and I'm not talking about this situation because I don't know it, but a 5-minute film does not necessarily mean swooping in. Just because it's short doesn't mean that you haven't done. So it's much more about the process, right? Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you, panelists, too.